What's up, Green Nation? The atmosphere feels different today. You can feel it in the air. Ever since that move exploded behind the scenes, everything around this team has carried a new weight, a sense of urgency you just can't ignore. This isn't just another late-season tweak. It's a clear signal that something bigger is happening inside this offense, and the next decisions could define how far this roster goes. So come in strong. Smash that like button if you've been around since the Chuck Bednarik days, and if you can, drop a "Let's Go Eagles" in the comments. The front office opening the practice window for Myles Hinton is more than just a procedural update. It's a response to a reality the Eagles have been trying to avoid for weeks. The offensive line is battered, inconsistent, and far from the dominant force it used to be. Hinton isn't just a depth piece, he's a potential stabilizer at a moment when stability is almost non-existent. He flashed real promise in training camp: size, athleticism, strength in the run game, the kind of raw material Jeff Stoutland loves to mold. And the Eagles need someone like that right now, especially with Lane Johnson out 4 to 6 weeks after suffering a Lisfranc injury in his left foot. That single injury changes everything. You remove one of the best right tackles in NFL history from an already underperforming unit, and suddenly every weakness becomes bigger, every pressure more dangerous, and every decision on offense feels like it's being made on a timer. The Eagles have managed to survive short stretches without Lane. They're 5-0 without him the last 2 seasons, but across his career, the numbers tell a different story. With Lane, they win 2/3 of their games. Without him, that drops below 40%. You don't lose a player like that and simply adjust. You scramble. Fred Johnson stepping into the right tackle role is the best-case scenario under impossible circumstances. He's played well in emergency moments this year, filling in multiple times when Lane has gone down, but there's a difference between spot duty and being the guy for over a month, especially with Dallas on deck and Micah Parsons lining up wherever he smells weakness. And it's not just tackle. Cam Jurgens' situation at center brings its own set of problems. 2 separate injuries, the back surgery, the inconsistency. It's been a frustrating year for him, and his absence means Brett Toth may once again be thrust into a role that comes with very little margin for error. Toth has had flashes of solid play, even holding his own against some strong interior fronts earlier in the season, but everyone watching knows the truth. He's still the piece defenses will attack first. Every protection call, every snap, every pressure that moves the pocket just a little too far off its spot. These are the moments that decide games. And when the Cowboys bring Quinnen Williams, Kenny Clark, and Osa Odigizua right up the gut, it changes the entire structure of what the Eagles' offense can even attempt to do. And that's where this conversation becomes bigger than injuries. Because the offensive line issues are stacking on top of play-calling issues, and those are stacking on top of quarterback tendencies, and now everything feels like it's merging into one large, frustrating identity crisis. The Eagles don't target the middle of the field. They don't vary route concepts. They run hitches at a historic rate while having one of the worst third-down offenses in the league. It's predictable, it's conservative, and most importantly, it's limiting players who should be taking over games, not disappearing for entire quarters. A.J. Brown's route charts tell the story better than anyone could. Some weeks, it's creativity and spacing. Other weeks, including the Lions game, the entire field shrinks into 2 narrow lanes near the boundary, stripping away the very thing that made this offense unstoppable early in his Eagles' career: multiplicity. That's why the frustration inside the locker room makes sense. Winning matters. It matters more than anything. But when the offense is this restricted, this lacking in variety, you can feel the talent being wasted in real time. And yet, there's another layer to all this: turnovers. The organization is obsessed with protecting the football, and honestly, with good reason. Under Nick Sirianni, when the Eagles win the turnover battle, they're 40-2. That's not just a stat, that's a philosophy backed by results. It explains the caution, the avoidance of the middle of the field, the reliance on safe concepts. But it also explains why the offense sometimes looks like it's afraid to take risks, afraid to unleash what it actually has. At what point does protecting the football start hurting the offense more than helping the team? At what point does staying conservative actually become the bigger danger? That's where I want to leave this first part. With everything happening, the injuries, the roster decisions, the offensive predictability, the philosophical tug-of-war, what do you, as a fan watching this unfold, think is the true root of the problem right now? Picking up right where everything left off. The real tension surrounding this team isn't just about a struggling offense, it's about a front office, a coaching staff, and a roster caught between what worked in the past and what's required now to survive the present. Because once you peel back all the layers, the story becomes unavoidable. The Philadelphia Eagles aren't just trying to fix problems, they're trying to rediscover who they are at a moment when identity is everything. And that identity crisis becomes painfully clear when you watch the offense offense try to function behind an offensive line that no longer looks like the one that bulldozed its way through the league last season. Every unit in football leans on chemistry, but the offensive line depends on it more than any other position group: timing, trust, instincts, recognition. When that five-man wall has played only one full game together this entire season, the ripple effect reaches every corner of the offense. The run game never finds rhythm. The pass game can't evolve. The quarterback starts playing fast even when the pocket is clean. Everything turns into a reaction instead of a plan. And that's part of what you're seeing with Jalen Hurts. Not because he's incapable of attacking the middle of the field, he's shown touch there at different points in his career, but because he's been conditioned into playing in a structure that prioritizes avoiding danger at all costs. When turnovers equate to losses at the rate the Eagles track under Sirianni, every read suddenly carries a little more weight. Every throw over the middle looks like a risk. Every hitch or boundary route feels like the safe option. And when that becomes ingrained, it becomes habit. The problem is that defenses know it now. They know exactly where the Eagles prefer to operate. They know the offense wants to stay outside the numbers. They know the route concepts lean heavily on hitches and stops. They know the offense rarely stresses the middle of the field vertically. And when a defense knows your tendencies to that degree, even the best players in the league struggle to break free. Look at A.J. Brown. Look at DeVonta Smith. Look at how often they've been reduced to winning tough, contested throws instead of being schemed open with layered concepts and spacing. That's not a personnel problem. That's a structural one. And the worst part is the offense has already shown the blueprint for how good it can look when the play designs actually challenge a defense. There were games last season, even moments this season, when AJ was moving across the field, running crossers, deep overs, posts, slot fades, routes that used the entire field. The offense became unpredictable. Defenses had to respect every blade of grass. The Eagles became the aggressor again. But right now, it feels like this offense is stuck in neutral, waiting for someone, anyone, to push the structure in a more dynamic direction. This is why Miles Hinton's practice window matters. Why Willie Lampkin's development matters. Why every move on the offensive line suddenly feels huge. If the Eagles can stabilize the trenches, even temporarily, it gives this coaching staff the freedom to open up the playbook again. It gives Hurts the confidence to hang in the pocket for that extra beat. It gives the receivers a chance to run the kinds of routes that create real separation. It gives the entire offense the chance to operate with the kind of unpredictability it desperately needs. And with Dallas looming, with Quinnen Williams collapsing pockets, with Micah Parsons hunting mismatches, the Eagles don't just need improvement, they need a breakthrough. They need creativity. They need courage. Because the alternative is playing exactly the way defenses expect them to, and that's how games get away from you before halftime. So here's the question I want to leave with you as we move into the final stretch of this breakdown, because it's the one that will shape everything that comes next. Do you believe this coaching staff has the willingness, not just the ability, to evolve this offense in time for a playoff run? And this is where everything converges. The injuries, the conservative philosophy, the predictability, the frustration inside the building, all of it forming a pressure point the Eagles can no longer avoid. Because now, heading into the most defining stretch of the season, the question isn't just what's wrong with the offense. The question is what this team is willing to change in order to fix it. You can feel that tension growing with every snap. The Cowboys game isn't just another rivalry matchup. It's the kind of test that exposes whether a team is built to withstand adversity or destined to crumble under the weight of it. If the offense comes out with the same route concepts, the same hitch-heavy tendencies, the same reluctance to target the middle of the field, then Dallas, with its rebuilt interior front, will attack every weakness mercilessly. Quinnen Williams isn't just another body inside. He's someone who can flip a game on the first series. Kenny Clark can collapse a pocket when the center is still trying to settle into rhythm. And Osa Odigizua is one of the most disruptive interior players most fans outside Dallas barely know about. This is the week where predictability becomes dangerous. And that's why the offensive evolution isn't optional, it's required. The Eagles have too much talent to keep operating like this. You don't have A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith and Dallas Goedert just to run hitches until the cornerbacks stop laughing. You don't have a quarterback with Hurts' physical tools just to reduce the passing concepts to the safest menu possible. You don't go through the trouble of drafting versatile linemen like Hinton and Lampkin if you don't intend to put them in positions where their movement and physicality can actually change the rhythm of the offense. Every great team reaches a moment in their season where someone has to draw a line and say, enough. We've seen the problems. Now we attack them. Maybe that starts with Kevin Patullo breaking tendencies and calling crossers early. Maybe it starts with Hurts hitting the first in-breaker just to force the linebackers to widen in coverage. Maybe it starts with a change in how they use tempo. Maybe it starts with trusting the protection long enough to let the deeper routes develop. Maybe it starts with using motion to create leverage. But it has to start somewhere, because if the offense continues to shrink the field instead of expanding it, the defense will eventually break under the strain of carrying the team. There's also the psychological factor that never gets talked about enough. When players feel boxed in by an offensive structure, when they know the plays being called aren't maximizing their abilities, frustration builds faster than anyone wants to admit. And that's how tension creeps in. That's how teams start pressing. That's how rhythm disappears. Talent alone can no longer overcome predictability. The Eagles are at that crossroads right now. The roster is too good. The window is too valuable. You cannot waste a season like this by refusing to evolve. Not when the margin for error in the NFC is razor thin. Not when teams like the Lions and 49ers have already reinvented themselves in their own ways this year. Not when Dallas, for all its flaws, has enough firepower to make you pay for even the smallest hesitation. And that's why this moment feels so massive for Philadelphia. Because if they can stabilize the offensive line, open the playbook, and finally use the middle of the field the way elite offenses do, everything changes. The run game opens up, third downs become manageable, the receivers become lethal again, the quarterback becomes unpredictable instead of readable. The entire identity shifts back to the team that just a year ago felt unstoppable. But if they don't, if the offense stays narrow, conservative, and limited, then the season becomes a race against time with no guarantee of a breakthrough. So before this video wraps up, let me throw it back to you, the fans who see every snap, feel every flaw, and ride every high and low with this team. Do you believe the Eagles' offense will actually evolve, or are we watching the same problems repeat until it's too late? And here's the thing, even after everything we've already unpacked, there's still another layer to this story that Eagles fans deserve to hear, because what's happening inside this offense isn't just about execution or injuries or even coaching philosophy. It's about urgency. It's about self-awareness. It's about whether the Eagles recognize the danger of letting a championship window flicker when it should be burning at full strength. This team is built to win now, not in 2 years, not once the offense settles in. Now, and that's why every decision from this point forward carries weight. Every adjustment, whether it's a shift in formation, a new wrinkle in the route concepts, a change in personnel rotation, matters more than it did in September. The Eagles don't have the luxury of easing into solutions anymore. They have to confront the issues head-on, especially with the Cowboys, the playoff race, and the larger NFC picture staring them down. What makes this moment so compelling is that it forces the coaching staff to decide what type of team they want to be. Do they want to remain a hyper-conservative offense built around avoiding mistakes? Or do they want to unleash the kind of creativity and aggression that once made them the most feared unit in football? That choice doesn't just affect scheme, it impacts how the locker room responds, how confident the players feel, and how opponents prepare during the stretch run. Players like A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, they know what this offense should look like. They've lived it. They've seen what happens when route concepts open up, when spacing stretches defenses thin, when tempo keeps pass rushers on their heels, and when the coaching staff trusts the players to dictate the game instead of simply reacting to it. They know what it feels like when the offense stops being careful and starts being dangerous again. That's why this next phase of the season feels like a challenge not just to the roster, but to the identity of the coaching staff. Will Kevin Patullo evolve? Will Nick Sirianni let the offense breathe and expand? Will the Eagles finally force defenses to defend every blade of grass instead of just the boundaries? Because make no mistake, the Cowboys, the Lions, the 49ers, the Packers, all of them will test this offense in different ways. And if the Eagles walk into those matchups with the same narrow play design, the same reliance on hitches, the same hesitancy to attack the heart of a defense, the same predictability that's plagued them for weeks, they'll get exposed. Not because the team isn't talented enough, but because the structure won't allow the talent to shine. But if the Eagles are willing to adapt, if they commit to unpredictability, if they trust their playmakers, if they dare to attack the places defenses don't expect, then everything changes. Suddenly the offense becomes the aggressor again. Suddenly the quarterback regains rhythm. Suddenly the receivers start taking games over. Suddenly the run game becomes something defenses must honor instead of something they anticipate. This season still has time to flip. The story isn't finished, but it will only flip if the Eagles are honest about what's been holding them back and bold enough to fix it. Now I'll turn it back over to you once again. With everything we've broken down, do you still believe this team has what it takes to reclaim the offense we know they're capable of, or has the window started to tighten more than anyone expected? And the deeper you look into this situation, the clearer it becomes that the Eagles aren't suffering from a lack of talent. They're suffering from a lack of synchronization. The offense, the coaching staff, the philosophy, and the execution all feel slightly misaligned, like 4 gears spinning at different speeds instead of locking into one powerful rhythm. And when a team as talented as this one falls out of sync, the entire machine slows down. That's why the next few weeks will expose something far more important than whether the Eagles win a rivalry game or move up in the NFC standings. They'll expose whether this staff can adjust under pressure, whether they can let go of old habits, and whether they trust the roster enough to allow creativity to override caution. Because playing scared, even subtly, shows up on film. It shows up in spacing. It shows up in route concepts. It shows up in how often the quarterback feels he has to make the perfect read instead of the aggressive one. And it shows up when defenses start predicting exactly where the ball is going before the snap. You've seen flashes this season of the offense Philadelphia could be. You've seen drives where Hurts looks decisive, where the line gives him that clean first read, where A.J. Brown or DeVonta Smith becomes the mismatch that pulls the entire defense into panic mode. You've seen series where tempo neutralizes the rush, where motion opens windows, where the play-action game suddenly reappears after being dormant. But those flashes never sustain. They never last long enough to shape the identity of the offense. They appear, then fade, then reappear, then disappear for an entire quarter. And that inconsistency is exactly what keeps opponents in games they shouldn't be in. The bigger question is why the Eagles are refusing to lean into what actually works. Why are they resisting the middle of the field? Why are they emphasizing concepts that shrink the playbook instead of expanding it? Why are they refusing to put defenders in conflict, forcing them to choose between two wrong answers the way elite offenses do? Sometimes a team struggles because their talent isn't good enough. That's not the case here. This team struggles because its structure doesn't match its potential. And now, with the season entering its most unforgiving stretch, the Eagles are standing at the line between possibility and disappointment. They can redefine themselves, or they can keep repeating the same patterns and hope talent alone wins out. But hope isn't a strategy. Not in this league, not in December, and not with the Dallas Cowboys waiting on the schedule. If the Eagles want to survive the next month, they need to stop being reactive and start becoming intentional. They need to stop fearing mistakes and start forcing defenses to make them. They need to stop waiting for rhythm to appear and start creating it themselves. Because when this offense finally plays with confidence and aggression, real aggression, it becomes something opponents genuinely fear. So here's the final question I'll leave you with. After everything we've broken down, everything we've exposed, and everything this team still has ahead, do you think the Eagles will finally make the offensive changes we've all been waiting for, or are we headed for another stretch of frustrating, predictable football? And here's where the urgency becomes impossible to ignore, because every week that passes without this offense evolving is another week where the margin for error shrinks, the injuries pile up, and the frustration grows behind the scenes. This isn't the same offense that stormed through the league last year. This is an offense stuck between what it was and what it still could be if the staff is willing to make the changes that the entire football world can now see are necessary. The most telling part of this entire situation is how long the Eagles have tried to make the same formula work, even as the cracks became obvious. They've leaned heavily on ball security, leaned on boundary throws, leaned on hitch-heavy concepts, and leaned on the idea that talent alone could compensate for predictability. But as defenses collect more tape, as tendencies grow more obvious, and as protection becomes less stable, that formula collapses under its own weight. You can feel it in the rhythm of the games. The Eagles aren't dictating anymore, they're reacting. They're not stretching defenses, they're consolidating the field. They're not building drives, they're surviving plays. And when a team this talented starts playing in survival mode, something deeper is wrong than just an injury or a bad game plan. That's why the offensive line situation is so central to everything. When the line is healthy and functioning as one, the entire offense breathes. Hurts looks calm, the route concepts have time to develop, the run game gains traction, and suddenly the middle of the field isn't a danger zone, it's an opportunity. But with the constant shuffling, with Lane Johnson unavailable, with Cam Jurgens in and out of the lineup, with Toth stepping into massive responsibilities, the offense has lost the foundation it needs to operate with confidence. And that confidence affects everything, even the play calls themselves. Coaches don't dial up deeper progressions when they don't trust the protection. They don't call crossers when they fear interior penetration disrupting timing. They don't scheme up complex concepts when the quarterback is forced into quick-trigger decision-making. It all becomes shorter, quicker, safer, and more predictable. But this is where the coaching staff has to make a choice. You cannot wait for perfect conditions to return. You cannot play small ball football against teams built to attack weaknesses. You cannot shrink a playbook built for explosive players. At some point, you have to trust your guys, even if the line isn't perfect, even if the risks are greater than you'd prefer, because playing scared becomes its own kind of turnover. It costs you opportunities, it costs you momentum, and eventually, it costs you games. If the Eagles want to reclaim their identity, the aggressive, fast-paced, unpredictable identity that won them a championship, they're going to have to embrace discomfort. They're going to have to break tendencies, use motion, hit the middle of the field, and trust the receivers to win. They're going to have to trust Hurts to be more than a caretaker and trust the offensive line to hold just long enough to let the offense breathe again. Because here's the reality: no team sleepwalks into the postseason and flips a switch. You build that edge now, in the toughest games, under the harshest pressure. And this stretch, with Dallas at the front of it, is exactly where teams either harden into contenders or reveal themselves as pretenders. So I'll end this final segment with the question that genuinely matters most at this point. With everything on the line, do you think this team will rise to the moment and reclaim the offensive identity that once made them a threat to everyone, or are we heading toward a season defined by what could have been? And here's where the urgency becomes impossible to ignore, because every week that passes without this offense evolving is another week where the margin for error shrinks, the injuries pile up, and the frustration grows behind the scenes. This isn't the same offense that stormed through the league last year. This is an offense stuck between what it was and what it still could be if the staff is willing to make the changes that the entire football world can now see are necessary. The most telling part of this entire situation is how long the Eagles have tried to make the same formula work, even as the cracks became obvious. They've leaned heavily on ball security, leaned on boundary throws, leaned on hitch-heavy concepts, and leaned on the idea that talent alone could compensate for predictability. But as defenses collect more tape, as tendencies grow more obvious, and as protection becomes less stable, that formula collapses under its own weight. You can feel it in the rhythm of the games. The Eagles aren't dictating anymore, they're reacting. They're not stretching defenses, they're consolidating the field. They're not building drives, they're surviving plays. And when a team this talented starts playing in survival mode, something deeper is wrong than just an injury or a bad game plan. That's why the offensive line situation is so central to everything. When the line is healthy and functioning as one, the entire offense breathes. Hurts looks calm, the route concepts have time to develop, the run game gains traction, and suddenly the middle of the field isn't a danger zone, it's an opportunity.